The scream tore through the canyon like a hawk's cry, sharp and sudden, splitting the golden hush of dusk. Elias Crowder halted his mule mid-step. His ears twitched toward the sound, low and panicked, ragged with terror. He scanned the horizon. Nothing moved save for the drifting gauze of evening mist across the salt flats. Then it came again, a child's voice, warbling and strangled, coming from the basin below where cottonwoods dipped their heads over a sink of dryland brush. He turned off the trail, spurred his mule down a narrow game path that buckled beneath brittle roots. The sound grew louder now, splashes, a choking gurgle. Quicksand. Elias slid from the saddle and ran the last 20 yards, boots cracking, twigs, breath heaving. At the center of a pale, sucking patch of earth was a boy, no more than 10, his chest barely above the mire, arms flailing like broken wings. His dark braids floated on the surface like coiled ropes. Comanche. Elias knelt near the edge, reaching out with his riding quirt. "Grab it, son. Grab it now." The boy latched on weakly. The mud let go with grudging slurps as Elias heaved, muscles cording in his neck, the scent of rot and iron thick in his nose. The child collapsed on solid ground, shivering and coated in gray muck. Elias wiped his brow, staring at the boy, doe-eyed, silent, breathing hard. No words passed between them. The wind carried dust and twilight across their faces. Elias looked to the ridgeline. No one came, no pursuit, just that boy and the slow, dreadful understanding that nothing about tonight would fade easy. He sighed once. "Let's get you home, I reckon." Elias Crowder hadn't spoken more than a dozen words in as many months. Since the fire took his wife and the cholera claimed his boy, he'd folded into the hills like an old bear nursing old wounds. Folks in town called him dead or near to it, but he lived barely on the edge of Comanche lands in a cabin built from juniper and grief. No one visited. No letters came. His days were spent tending goats, mending fences, and trying not to think of the blaze that split his life in two. Inside that cabin, dust clung to everything, the rifle above the hearth, the cracked fiddle in the corner, and the faded sketch of a boy with a gap-toothed grin drawn in charcoal. Elias kept that one under a tin cup as if weight could hold back memory. But memory seeped in anyway, through knots in the wood and the silence between dawn and dusk. He didn't sleep much. Dreams came hungry, fire screaming, a woman's hand vanishing in smoke, and always that boy's voice calling Pa until it turned to ash. Some mornings Elias woke with his knuckles clenched so tight he had to peel his fingers apart. He hadn't ridden into town in nearly a year. Didn't need to. The land fed him. Solitude kept him breathing, and guilt kept him from doing anything else. But that night, after pulling the Comanche boy from the mire, Elias returned to the cabin with something alive tucked in his arms. The boy said nothing, just watched Elias with wide dark eyes, breathing shallow. He had a twisted ankle and bruises along his ribs, maybe from the fall into the pit. Elias laid him down on an old cot near the stove, washed the muck from his face with warm water, and fed him spoonfuls of broth made from goat bones and root vegetables. "You got a name?" Elias asked. The boy blinked once but said nothing. Elias sighed and stood reaching for the lantern. "Guess that don't matter now." He gave the boy a blanket and stepped out into the cold, leaning against the porch post, pipe in hand. Coyotes howled in the far distance, but Elias wasn't listening. He was staring at the moon, round and silent like the eye of a god that refused to blink. Inside, the boy slept, twitching once or twice as though outrunning nightmares. Elias watched him through the slatted window. Something knotted in his gut, low and tight, a thing he thought long dead. That boy had looked at him with the same eyes his own son once had just before the fever took him. And now, in this quiet place, something else crept in beside Elias's bitterness. Not hope, not yet. But maybe the beginning of something heavier, something worth staying awake for. He tamped the pipe, drew a slow breath, and whispered to the dark, "You brought him here for a reason, didn't you?" No answer came. Only wind brushing the ridge dry and cool, carrying the weight of old sins and unburied days. Morning came with frost on the porch rail and steam curling from the boy's breath. Elias found him sitting up, blanket draped over his shoulders, staring at the glowing stove as if it held secrets. His ankle was swollen tender to the touch and his ribs bruised from the struggle. Elias brewed willow bark tea, wrapped the ankle tight with cloth, and laid a wooden cane beside him. The boy took it with quiet grace, his eyes meeting Elias's with a gravity beyond his years. "I'll call you Hawk," Elias said. "For the way you don't blink." The boy didn't protest. That day passed in slow labor. Elias repaired fence posts, milked the goats, split logs. Hawk sat on the porch with his cane resting across his lap, watching everything, never speaking, never flinching at the hammer strikes or the bleating herd. He followed Elias's movements with a sharp gaze, like a young scout learning terrain. When Elias dropped a nail, Hawk picked it up and handed it back without a word. No childlike fear or whining, just silence and watching. At night, Elias took out his fiddle for the first time in years. He didn't play it, not yet, but he wiped the dust away, ran his fingers along the strings. Hawk leaned forward, eyes wide. Elias noticed. "You know music?" he asked. Hawk nodded slowly, then pointed at the fiddle. "My mother played that," he said in a soft, broken English. "Before they burned our camp." Elias's fingers froze on the bow. His eyes lifted. "Who did that?" The boy looked into the fire. Blue coats with black flags. Elias said nothing for a long time. The flames snapped in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Finally, he set the fiddle down and poured 2 mugs of tea. The boy sipped without complaint, his hands steady. Later that night, Elias woke from a nightmare, sweating fists clenched, the scream of his son echoing in his ears. He sat up, heart pounding, and found Hawk already awake, sitting by the stove with his knees hugged to his chest. Elias walked over, sat beside him on the floor. Neither spoke. The fire cracked and hissed. "You see your mother die?" Elias asked. The boy nodded. "I saw my son die," Elias said. "Fever took him. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't protect him." The boy looked at him with those deep, unwavering eyes, then leaned his head against Elias's shoulder. Just for a second. Then he pulled away and returned to watching the fire. The days passed. Elias taught him how to boil coffee, how to snare rabbits, how to use the sling blade on creeping brush. Hawk limped but learned fast. His silence became a comfort, not a burden. At night he would draw animals in the dirt with a stick, coyotes, buffalo, horses in full gallop. Elias would watch sometimes, adding horns or feathers, and the boy would smile faintly once or twice. Something in the cabin changed. The air felt less heavy, the silence less cruel. Elias even shaved for the first time in weeks. But at the back of his mind, a drum beat sounded, a slow, steady thump. Someone would come looking for this boy, maybe his tribe, maybe someone worse. And Elias, despite every part of him that longed to stay buried in this quiet, couldn't shake the feeling that the ridge wouldn't stay quiet much longer. It began with the vultures, 5 of them circling low over a ridge to the south. Elias spotted them at midday while hauling water from the spring. He froze one hand on the yoke, the other tightening around the worn leather strap of his rifle. Vultures meant death, and not of goat or varmint. Something bigger. Something recent. He squinted into the sun. Dust rose beyond the ridge. Riders. He herded Hawk into the cabin and slid the bar across the door. "Don't come out unless I call," he said. The boy obeyed, his face grim. Elias climbed the slope behind his property with the patience of a tracker, belly to the ground, boots dragging behind like a lizard's tail. From the crest he saw them. 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the pale dust, their mounts lean and hardened by distance. Each bore a black flag lashed to their saddlebags, strips of cloth that flapped like mourning veils. Their rifles were slung low, holsters tied down for fast draw. Elias knew that mark. Ashwind Riders. He hadn't heard that name in years, but the stories lingered. A breakaway cavalry unit turned bounty gang known for wiping out entire settlements to flush out a single man. Led by Captain Silas Bricks, a name that once struck fear from Pecos to Waco. Silas had ridden under the U.S. flag until the war ended and he saw profit in chaos. Now he served no country, only coin. Elias ducked back and slid down the slope, his mind racing. Hawk watched him from the doorway. "Bad men," the boy said. "Yes," Elias replied. "And they don't come without reason." That night Elias dug up the box under his floorboards. Wrapped in oilcloth was an old cavalry revolver still loaded. Next to it, a yellowed letter sealed in wax, never opened. He held it for a long time before setting it aside. He wasn't ready for that yet. At dawn, hoofbeats echoed from the valley. The Ashwind Riders approached without subtlety. Dust rose behind them like a ghost army. Elias stood in the doorway, rifle across his arms. Hawk watched from inside. Silas Bricks led them, tall, wiry, with a gray beard like barbed wire and a saber strapped to his saddle. His coat bore a faded insignia, a crow over crossed rifles, and his eyes were the pale blue of a frozen creek. Crowder Bricks said, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. Didn't think you'd still be breathing. Didn't think you'd still be killing children, Elias replied. Bricks grinned. War never ends, friend. Just changes uniforms. Elias didn't step aside. You here for the boy? Bricks nodded toward the cabin. Comanche whelp. His tribe's been running raids north of the Brazos. Killed 6 miners, burned a trade post. We're cleaning up. He ain't part of that, Elias said. He's 10. Don't matter. Message needs sending. Bricks leaned forward. You always had a soft spot for lost causes. That's what got your family killed. Remember, Elias's face didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on the rifle. You took something from me, Bricks said. Long time ago. That gold shipment, the deserters you sheltered, I lost good men 'cause of your bleeding heart. I don't owe you a damn thing, Elias said. And you won't take the boy. Silence fell like dust after a storm. Bricks leaned back in his saddle, spitting into the dirt. We'll be back by sundown. Maybe you'll come to your senses. Maybe not. He turned his horse. Either way, we're taking him. The riders wheeled around and vanished into the basin. Elias shut the door. Hawk stood near the stove, hands curled tight. You knew him? The boy said. Yes. You fought together? No. We survived together, that's different. That afternoon, Elias turned the cabin into a fortress. He set traps along the trail, tripwire triggers, sharpened stakes hidden under loose brush, old tin cans filled with rock dust to serve as alarm bells. He loaded the revolver, checked his Winchester, and handed Hawk a small knife. Only if you have to, Elias said. Hawk nodded solemnly. As dust crawled across the ridge, Elias sat on the porch, rifle across his knees. He wasn't young anymore. His hands ached. His vision blurred if he stared too long. But he'd made peace with dying long ago. What he hadn't made peace with was letting a child be dragged off screaming. The wind shifted, horses whinnied, then came the thunder of hooves. 5 riders emerged through the brush side by side, sabers glinting, rifles drawn. Elias stood slowly, heart steady. Behind him, Hawk watched with eyes that held the weight of fire and loss. Come on then, Elias whispered. Let's see what ghosts still have teeth. The first shot cracked through the dusk like a tree limb snapping under ice. One of the Ashwind Riders reeled back in the saddle, a bloom of red unfurling from his chest before he toppled sideways. The others scattered, hooves thundering as they darted for cover. Elias worked the lever of the Winchester with calm precision, eyes narrowed, breath measured. He'd picked his perch behind a low rock wall just uphill from the cabin, shadows stretching long beside him. He knew this land better than any man alive. A rider charged the front path. The tripwire snapped. His horse shrieked and crashed into the underbrush. Elias didn't need to shoot. He let the panic work its own ruin. The third rider found the caltrop scatter near the goat pen, his mount slipping. He tumbled to the ground and rose bleeding just in time for Elias's second bullet to punch through his shoulder, spinning him backward into the dirt. 2 down, 1 wounded, 2 still moving, and Bricks was one of them. Elias slid down behind the wall, heart-pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. He wasn't invincible. His right shoulder ached from the recoil. His aim was slower now, breath shorter. The ash of age and guilt weighed heavy. Inside the cabin, Hawk crouched with his knife clutched tight, every sound a strike to his nerves. When the tin can alarms rattled behind the smokehouse, the boy turned quickly, but it was only a goat, frightened and crashing through the pen. Still, he didn't relax. His world had shrunk to firelight and shadows. Elias circled wide around the ridge, his feet silent in the dirt. The last 2 riders were regrouping near the wash, trying to flank the cabin. He caught sight of the one with the drooping mustache, Jory if memory served. mean as a rattler, and twice as dumb. Elias aimed low, fired once. Jory collapsed with a scream, clutching a leg now half bone and splinters. That left Bricks. Silas Bricks did not run. He stood atop his horse at the base of the ridge, saber-drawn rifle slung over his back. His eyes were fixed on the cabin, on the smoke curling from its chimney, on the flickering shadow of a small boy crouched by the window. He dismounted slowly, tied off the reins, and began walking uphill. No rush, no fear. Elias stepped into view. "Just us now," he called. Bricks didn't stop. "I should have killed you in Arkansas. You tried. Lost 3 men doing it. You let a traitor go. You called it mercy." He spat. "That got your wife burned alive. Your boy died crying for you." Elias didn't flinch. "You're not walking past me, Silas." Bricks grinned and raised the saber. Elias fired. The bullet struck Bricks in the side, but the man didn't fall. He stumbled, caught himself, and came on closer now, saber dragging a furrow in the dirt. Elias worked the lever again, but the chamber jammed. He cursed and drew the revolver from his hip. Bricks surged forward, roaring like some ghost of the plains blade rising. The revolver roared once, twice. One shot missed. One struck the saber clean from Bricks's hand. The blade spun through the air and clattered onto the rocks. They stood 10 feet apart, Elias breathing hard, Bricks clutching his side, blood pouring through his fingers. Neither moved. "You got old," Bricks hissed. "You got cruel," Elias replied. From the cabin, Hawk appeared, knife still in hand. He limped forward, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on the man who'd spoken of burning camps and killing children. Bricks turned to him, laughed low. "Little savage, you'll die just like the rest." He took a step toward the boy. Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, swung the butt of his rifle, and caught Bricks in the jaw. The man crumpled. Dust settled. The air stilled. Silence. Elias dropped to one knee, chest heaving. Hawk stood frozen, then moved to Elias's side. They didn't speak. The boy simply laid a hand on Elias's shoulder. The Ashwind Riders were done. 3 dead. 1 crawling into the scrub. Bricks groaning in the dirt, finally quiet. But Elias knew it wasn't over. The boy's people would come. Maybe with questions, maybe with vengeance. And he needed to decide what to say when they did. As the moon rose cold and white, Elias carried Bricks's body to the tree line, laid it down and covered it with stones. No prayer. Just silence. Then he returned to the cabin and found Hawk sitting by the fire. Elias took the sealed letter from the box and sat beside him. "This," he said, voice low, "was meant for my son. I never had the guts to open it." He broke the wax. Inside was a drawing. A picture of Elias sketched by a young boy's hand. Crooked smile, big hat. Underneath in childish scrawl, "Pa is the bravest man I know." Elias's breath caught. He handed the letter to Hawk. The boy traced the lines with his fingers. Then he looked up. He was right. Elias tried to speak. Couldn't. Just placed a hand on the boy's head and let the fire speak for them. Outside, the ridge stood quiet. For now. The tribe arrived just before dawn. A low drum beat like distant thunder echoed through the valley, followed by the rustle of hooves and the sound of many feet walking with purpose. From the porch, Elias saw them crest the ridge one by one, silent, painted riders with bows slung across their backs and rifles held low. Their faces bore no rage, no panic, only resolve. They moved like shadows, fluid, deliberate. At the center rode an elder with braided gray hair and a red feathered staff across his saddle. He wore no war paint. His chest bore the scars of battle, not decoration. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, rested immediately on the cabin. Hawk stepped out beside Elias. The elder's eyes softened. The boy limped forward, pausing only once to glance back at Elias, then walked toward the riders. A murmur swept through them. The elder dismounted and dropped to one knee, arms wide. Hawk went to him and the two embraced. The elder held him for a long time, murmuring words in Comanche. Behind them, the others sat their horses in silence, bearing witness. When they pulled apart, the elder rose and turned to Elias. "You found him," he said in English, his voice like wind scraping stone. I pulled him from the mud, Elias replied. Nothing more. The man stepped forward, his people parting behind him. I am Chief Wanata. This boy is my blood. He vanished 3 days ago during a hunt. We feared he was taken or worse. His gaze swept the land. And now we find ash and death in your wake. Elias nodded once. They came for him. I didn't let them take him. Chief Wanata studied Elias. You fought them, I killed 3. Bricks is buried beyond the sycamore. The chief was silent. Then he said, we have not forgotten what you did. Sulphur Ridge 8 winters passed. Elias felt the words like frost on bone. His mouth went dry. We were camped near the river, Wanata continued. Peaceful. A truce signed. Your riders came anyway. Fire. Shot our women first, burned our food stores. I held my son in my arms as he died. He was Hawk's brother. Elias looked down. I wasn't part of that raid. You wore their coat, the chief said. You rode with them. I left when I learned the truth. I tried to stop it. They turned on me. That fire, it took my wife the next month. I paid for their sins every day since. Did you? The chief asked quietly. Elias stepped forward, eyes meeting his. I can't bring back your son, but I saved this one. I bled for him. I die for him. The men stood face to face, the long shadows of their pasts stretching between them. Wanata looked back at Hawk. The boy nodded once. The chief turned again to Elias. We believe in blood debt. For every wrong a price. Sometimes that price is death. Sometimes it is life. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a carved feather painted red at the tip, black at the base. This was meant for the man who would atone, Wanata said. I never thought I would give it. He handed it to Elias. Elias stared at it. What does it mean that you are marked not for death, but for memory? He placed a hand on Elias's chest. You carry our pain now, and we carry yours. Then Wanata turned and called in his native tongue. The tribe began to move slowly, silently past the cabin down the ridge. One by one, they nodded to Elias. Some touched the brims of their hats. Others only stared. None spoke. Hawk stood beside Elias as they passed, watching his people go. Wanata looked back once, then raised his staff and disappeared into the trees. Only the boy remained. Elias looked down. They didn't take you. I told them I had no father, Hawk said. Now I do. Elias closed his eyes. The wind stirred the dust between them. He opened them, stared at the red and black feather in his hand. The mark of memory, a symbol heavier than iron, and still somehow lighter than the guilt he'd carried for years. The land grew still in the days that followed. The traps Elias set rusted in the rain. Blood washed from the stones. Vultures circled once, then vanished. Nothing remained of the Ashwind Riders but boot prints that led nowhere, and the dented saber buried in the dirt beside the ridge. Elias left it there, half buried like a tombstone to an old part of himself. Hawk stayed. He fed the goats in silence, gathered kindling at dawn, traced stories into the dust with a stick, while the wind curled around the cabin like a ghost refusing to leave. He spoke little, but when he did, his words came easier shaped now by both tongues, his mother's and Elias's. On the third morning, Elias hung the carved feather over the hearth beside the old charcoal drawing of his boy. 2 sons now, one in ash, one in flesh, each a weight, each a gift. Elias began rebuilding the east wall of the cabin, not because it needed fixing, but because the work kept his hands from remembering too much. Hawk helped, passing him nails, holding planks, learning the rhythm of hammer and timber. At night, Elias played the fiddle. Broken songs, at first rough and halting. Then a tune emerged, slow mourning but whole. Hawk listened with his eyes closed, head resting on folded arms. One evening, as they sat watching the sun bleed into the hills, Hawk asked, will they come again? Elias didn't lie. Maybe. But they won't find you alone. The boy nodded. That was enough. And on the 4th day, they rode together. Elias atop his mule, Hawk on a small paint pony gifted by the tribe. They didn't go far, just to the ridge where the world opened like a wound that had learned to scar. They stood there a long time, side by side, two silhouettes against a sea of red earth. Elias removed his hat. "Your brother's buried out there somewhere," he said. "Maybe next spring we find him." Hawk didn't speak. He just reached over and held Elias's hand. That night after Hawk slept, Elias opened the letter again. He traced the drawing, whispered a name into the fire, and watched it rise as smoke. Then he stepped outside barefoot into the cool dark. The stars blinked in silence. He breathed deep. For the first time in years, there was no scream in his chest, just breath, just peace, just a boy asleep by the stove, safe and dreaming. He turned back toward the cabin, the carved feather stirring gently in the night breeze. The past was not gone, but it no longer ruled. The wind had shifted. The ridge had a new name now known only to the two who lived there. And when travelers passed through that part of the territory, they sometimes spoke of an old rancher with a Comanche boy riding at his side, quiet as dusk, steady as stone. No one knew the full tale, only that they were not to be troubled. For they lived where fire once raged, where blood once ran, and where mercy once buried had taken root. A root with red leaves. A root that remembered. And like all things planted in sorrow, one day it bloomed. Watch the next story to discover another soul carved by the West. And if these dusty trails speak to your heart, subscribe for more stories from the silent horizon.